Are you depressed? Are you on an antidepressant? Have you been given antidepressants by somebody who's supposed to be able to prescribe them? And you've been on them for a long time, and maybe they helped a little or a lot, but they're not helping now, but you can't get off of them. And when you try to get off of them, the person who prescribed them says, well, you see, when you try to go down on them, your depression comes back, so you need to take these forever. I don't think so. Hey, I'm the Beverly Hills Shrink, and welcome to your appointment. I'm glad you're on time for this session. Antidepressants. Incredibly lucrative market. Why did I say that first? Lucrative market. There's a lot of money in antidepressants. Is it fair money? I'm not on this side of the argument. 50% of the population experiences depression at some point in their life. Now listen to this carefully. Formal criteria for continued therapy of antidepressants is 1 year, 9 months to 1 year of pharmacotherapy, that's medication, in conjunction with appropriate psychotherapy, that's the talk kind of therapy. Then you come off the medication properly and see how you do. Was that offered to you? Were you told that in advance? Were you told anything about your antidepressant? Were you told that it's addictive? Well, let me step aside here. Narcotics are addictive. It was discovered early in the 1990s by physicians such as myself and others that people got onto SSRIs, couldn't get off. When they tried, it was horrible. Some killed themselves. But the lobbying of the pharmaceutical industry, whom we don't like, was such that there was no such thing as addiction or withdrawal to antidepressants. There was a discontinuation syndrome. Doesn't that sound nice? A discontinuation syndrome. So let's do a little bit of history first. Besides the fact that depression is endemic in society, there have been antidepressants since the 1960s. Before that, there were stimulants like methylphenidate, amphetamine, and cocaine, which were used for depression, as well as opiates that were used for depression, and there was electroconvulsive therapy. I'm not selling you any of that. I'm simply telling you what was available up until the late 1950s and early 1960s. In the 1960s, there were tricyclic antidepressants. They were magic. They helped people with depression. The first, I think, was imipramine, or it may have been amitriptyline. They're closely related and came out pretty much close to one another. And their derivatives, protriptyline, nortriptyline, desipramine, were a family. They worked very, very well when properly used by physicians who know how to use them. What was the downside of the tricyclics? They were very dangerous if you overdosed. If you took 2 to 3 times the amount of a daily dose, you could kill yourself. So that was the downside of giving these medications to people who were depressed and prone to suicidal ideation, suicidal urges. But I learned how to use these drugs back in the 1970s. They worked incredibly well, but you have to be on a very special diet, avoid certain foods, avoid certain medications, or drug interaction could kill you. Well, that lowers the enthusiasm for the MAO inhibitors, but they're life-saving for many people. Long about the late 1980s, early 1990s, something came out called the SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or serotonin selective reuptake inhibitors. It's the same thing, SSRI. These medications were reported to increase serotonin. Serotonin is one of the neurotransmitters involved in depression, primarily with dopamine and noradrenaline. Serotonin is probably the least important in my opinion, but that's a different thing. The SSRIs do increase receptor sensitivity to serotonin at various places in the brain. They're also addictive. It's not habituation, it's addiction. No, not the kind of addiction where you crave heroin because you're going to withdrawal, but it's the kind of addiction where if you miss a couple of doses, you're miserable. You're crawling out of your skin. You don't know what to do. You're going to kill yourself. You need to take your antidepressant. You're so miserable. That misery is not depression. It's akathisia. It's a horrible, miserable internal feeling of dysphoria, like you want to crawl out of your skin or kill yourself. You can't sit still. The SSRIs were purported to be wonderful, marvelous, exceptional, incredible for all forms of depression and OCD and anxiety and anything that might ail you. Wonderful, terrific, incredible. You need to have it. You can't survive without it. We don't know what they're really going to do to you, but if you take it, you might live. That's a great marketing ploy, isn't it? When the SSRIs first came out, those of us still around who tried them were not happy. We found people having adverse reactions, akathisia being the most prominent. Akathisia, acute akathisia, makes people kill themselves. They don't know what's going on, particularly children. I remember a 9-10-year-old boy who was on 60 milligrams of paroxetine, very high potency. He was miserable. He couldn't sit still. He was crawling all over the place. I advised the parents that he was addicted to it and needed to be detoxed safely. Pediatrician told the family that I was a moron, didn't know what I was talking about, and stopped the paroxetine. The next day, the kid jumped out of a third-story window. So, what happens with antidepressants? If you take an antidepressant, supposedly it takes 2 to 3 weeks for a fair to good response and 2 to 3 months for a full response. That's what frustrates so many people about antidepressants. They don't take one shot and they're better. The SSRIs were a different beast. You took 1, 2, 3 days and you were not so distressed. The misery was sort of gone. You weren't horribly distressed and thinking about killing yourself and everything else that's bad. You weren't feeling anything, however. When we ask patients who are started on SSRIs, who come to people like me to get off of them, say, well, did you notice anything within the first few days? They'll say, well, yeah, I felt better. And I ask, what do you mean you felt better? Did you feel normal, happy, your usual self before you got depressed? Or did you feel less? Did you feel numb, dull, not there but not distressed? 98% say, I wasn't bothered. And after several months or several years on these drugs, I ask, so, how do you feel now? Back to your normal self? Or dulled, unfeeling, nothing's going on, but you're not depressed and suicidal? The latter is the answer. So, what's happening? Dopamine is a chemical in your brain that makes you feel really good. It's released by certain antidepressants and stimulants, such as methylphenidate, amphetamine, cocaine, methamphetamine. I'm not selling any of those, simply telling you. They release dopamine and noradrenaline, and they make many people feel better. They make some people feel worse, which means they need serotonin, but the others will do well with something that mobilizes those other transmitters, not serotonin. So when somebody who's stuck on their SSRI, paroxetine, fluoxetine, venlafaxine, see the similarity there? You have the imipramine drugs and you have the paroxetine drugs. So I'm not a biochemist. I don't model these drugs, but you're stuck on them. And when you try to come off of them, you feel horrible, miserable. Depending on how high you are on the dose, there's a decrease as you go down, and at a certain point, it breaks through. The habit-forming dopamine blockade breaks through. And these surges of dopamine, usually good for you, but not in this circumstance, drive you wild. This leads to a lot of suicides. This also leads to a lot of ignorant providers telling you, well, you see, when you try to get off of it, you become more agitated, anxious, and depressed. So you must stay on this forever. No, it's a marketing ploy. When these drugs came out in the early 90s, many of us saw the problem. We tried to write about it in medical journals, describing this addiction withdrawal or discontinuation syndrome. The first letter talking about this got published in a journal way in the back in the letters to the editor in 1997, which led to the admission of a discontinuation syndrome. Medical journals are sponsored by advertising. Virtually 100% of the advertising in medical journals is paid for by pharmaceutical companies. So, Is there a connection? I'll let you think about that one. We're going to have a follow-up on this. This is a lot to absorb. There won't be a quiz on it, but do a little research. I know the online stuff can be questionable, but look at the stuff about SSRI addiction and withdrawal. SSRI complications. That might frighten you, but do not, repeat, do not stop the medicine by yourself. Do not attempt to taper the medicine by yourself. That can be extremely dangerous or fatal. What you need to do is ask a few questions to your prescriber.
With these things in mind, Dr. Jory Goodman recommends you talk to your healthcare provider about the best options for you. And while Dr. Goodman cannot diagnose anyone or anything via a YouTube video, if you have any further questions about today's topic or anything else, please leave a comment below.
Our session is almost over. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And remember, always try to be on time on the couch for the Beverly Hills Shrink.